Okay, guys, you might be looking at me thinking, Mrs. Barrett looks like she just rolled out of bed. Mrs. Barrett did just roll out of bed, but I was so excited to show you guys what came to my house yesterday that I decided I was just going to go like this. So let me flip it around. Oh, can I not flip it when I'm videoing? Anyway, you ready for this? Look at all the books. So you might notice that some of these books that I'm showing you right now are all in Spanish. It's not just some of them, they're all in Spanish. That's because there are a lot of people at our school, our families, and even some of our students who speak and read Spanish. And the library's for everybody. So I wanted to make sure we had some really good Spanish titles. Now, the other thing you might have noticed when I was showing you that is there are some boxes back there. That's even more new books. Okay, guys, let's jump into our story, and you can look in the background and see what's going on with our books. So let me flip it like this. Okay, see? You can still see some of the books. And you can also tell that Mrs. Barrett is wearing her pajamas. Today, we are starting on chapter 11. So, as you noticed, wait, did they make it into, oh yeah. Remember how they thought they were going to have this grand home in San Francisco? And then when they got to San Francisco, they realized there really weren't any grand homes yet. There were a lot of tents. And lo and behold, that's what Father's gotten for them to live in, a tent. Chapter 11. As we soon discovered, having a tent home in San Francisco was like living atop an anthill that kept having more ants. Each day, hundreds of new people arrived in San Francisco. During our first weeks in the city, 200 more ships arrived and disgorged, let their passengers off. The vessels were thus added to the fleet called Rotten Row. Remember how there were all those abandoned boats? Daily, 15 or 30 so-called homes were put up in the city, with people moving into them all but instantly. There were never enough new homes. Nor was there, while most indelicate, it must be said, any sanitation. Waste was disposed of upon sandy hills or in the bay. The city stunk. Imagine if we didn't have any toilets and we didn't have people coming to pick up our trash. Imagine what a mess that would make. That's what she was living in. We used an earthenware chamber pot. I don't wish to say more. That was instead of a bathroom. At the beginning of the year, 1849, the city contained less than 2,000 citizens. By the time we arrived, there were something like 15,000. Gold was the magnet for these souls. It reminded me of the saying, where industry walks, greed gallops. Meaning, where there are people who are working hard, that kind of moves along. But if people figure out an easy way to make money, there it goes. Many a newcomer barely came to shore, but rushed off in search of gold, down bay, to what they call the diggings. These people call themselves Argonauts, after those who sought the golden fleece in ancient Greece. To my mind, these Californian newcomers were being fleeced. I refused to be. I took it upon myself to purchase food, only to discover that prices were extraordinarily high. For one egg, $1. A potato cost 75 cents. Water, $1 a bucket. What's more, as we learned, there was no easy access to water. We had to fetch it, buy it, and then haul it back to our tent, uphill. All this meant that I soon came to understand that Father had insufficient money for our needs. That led to the further realization that I must secure some money, which is to say, I needed to find work. As you know, I had worked. Discreet ladies' work in Providence. Would I, a girl in San Francisco, even be able to find, and what's more, be allowed to undertake employment? As it happened, because so many men were at the diggings, laborers were scarce. That meant it turned out to be easy for me to secure some work. I may have been a tall and skinny girl, but I was strong, and most of all, willing to learn. I'd done so before. As long as I could do the tasks required, nobody minded who I was. There was one major problem: my clothing. My girls' clothing. Skirts, blouses, and bonnets made it difficult to work, and they became constantly dirtied. Washing was at least a gross challenge, expensive and endlessly time-consuming. No wonder so many San Francisco men were filthy. From the moment I put my foot on California soil, I too was soiled. Since I had been raised with one of Aunt Lavinia's favorite notions, cleanliness is next to godliness, this was hard. I was forced to make the decision. I would have to dress in men's garb. Being so clothed would make it easier to work and easier to keep somewhat clean. Not truly clean, somewhat clean. I therefore purchased, sorry guys, this voice thing, while it's better, it still makes it hard to talk at long spurts. I therefore purchased baggy corduroy trousers and flannel shirts at Howard and Mellis, a large dry goods store by the Cove. This clothing allowed me to get through the mud while saving hours of washing chores. It had nothing to do with hiding who I was. It merely allowed me to labor. It let her work. Can you guys imagine trying to work in a big dress? Another thing, during my first days in the city, when I walked about in my girl's dress, many a miner approached and rudely asked me to marry him. You may be sure it wasn't love that brought these proposals, but I realized a desire to have a servant. My man's costume put an end to such absurd insults. I also kept my hair in one long braid, taking my style from Chinese men. You should look into that. Do you guys remember talking about that at all? About the number of Chinese people in San Francisco? The history of the Chinese in San Francisco is really interesting. So it was that within a week of our arrival, I was pushing wheelbarrows deep through mud. I learned to row, about which more later, a borrowed rowboat to help unload newly arrived ships and bring luggage and passengers to land. It paid well, though it did give me, at first, hand blisters. I also helped carpenters or newcomers put up frame houses and cover them with canvas, cotton, or paper. This is to say, I put my hands to whatever paid me. By doing so, I made as much as $10 a day or more. 10 times more than I had earned in Providence. Remember, in Providence, she was making 10 cents an hour. So even if she worked a whole day, it would maybe be $1. But remember, in San Francisco, an egg costs $1. Oddly enough, the men for whom I worked paid me with grains of gold, not coin. because there wasn't much real money around. That made me smile. Here was Father about to seek gold at diggings, while I was already acquiring gold by working in the city. I had more wealth than I ever thought possible, much more than Father had at that point. All of this enhanced my sense of freedom. Doing what was required meant I grew physically and mentally stronger every day, while onerous tasks became easier. Here was a new kind of spirited life, a new me. Could any heroine ask for more? Was this difficult? To be sure. You may believe I was truly required to live the notion that I would rather be happy than dignified. Let it be admitted, I had little dignity. Let it also be said that I enjoyed the independence. I think my working and my way of dressing was an embarrassment to Father. No doubt he barely recognized me. Well then, we hardly recognized him. He started to dress like a miner, complete with a red flannel shirt, slouch hat, and boots. He even grew a beard. He spent all that time learning what he must do, where to go, while purchasing the tools he needed for the diggings. Father, the most placid of men, now had a Bowie knife in his belt. I doubt he ever used it. In Providence, before he lost his position, he had been, as I previously described him, a careful, non-adventurous man, announcing that he was now merely days and a little effort from acquiring colossal wealth. He thought only of gold. This was not unusual. If gold fever was an illness on the East Coast, in San Francisco, it was a universal plague. Beyond all else, Father, who had been a most thoughtful, if restrictive parent, now showed us, his children, almost no attention at all. For the most part, he left us alone, telling us he was looking for servants and a school for Jacob. In all of this, only Jacob stayed the same. Whereas I had begun to work, Jacob was at a loss at what to do. At first, he tried to follow Father about. Father shooed him away. Then he tried joining me where I was working. That, too, proved impossible. As a result, he wandered aimlessly, though never far from our tent. It was painfully clear that Jacob much preferred to be taken care of, not wishing to make choices for himself, not willing to bestir himself. I was struck with the truth that as a sister grows older, her brother seems to grow younger. The most useful thing Jacob did was befriend our across-the-way neighbor, Senor Rosales. The good man was ever patient with Jacob as Jacob chattered and tried to help. As for me, Senor Rosales called me Corderita, which I understood to mean little lamb. A few days before Father headed for the diggings, we sat in the tent around a box that was our table, the sole light coming from the small, solitary, and smoky candle. As we ate our dinner of slab beef, which I had cooked outside over a fire, Father abruptly turned to me and said, "Tori, I trust you understand when I leave. It's all well and good that you are working, but your chief responsibility is to take care of Jacob." Taken by surprise, I echoed, "Chief?" "Of course, you are his sister, 4 years older than he. That makes you in charge. I have tried to hire a servant. None are to be had at the wages we paid back east. And I'm afraid to say, there seems to be no school here." Let it be said, the notion that henceforward I was to be the sole person responsible for Jacob was hardly pleasing to me. Once again, this is not what I had envisioned in coming west. Jacob's angry face made it clear that this was not what he desired either. He argued with Father, begging him to let us go to the gold fields with him. Father refused. "I'm depending on you," Father continued saying to me, "to take care of your brother. Mother is depending on it. Is that understood?" No doubt I nodded. But I was thinking not about Jacob, but myself. Here I was, a 14-year-old girl who had just begun to enjoy full freedom. Though Jacob surely was my dear brother, I cannot say I wanted to engage my time being a nursemaid to him. Yet I had to acknowledge this was in part my own doing. If I had not come to San Francisco, surely Father would have taken Jacob with him. There was nothing I could say. Even so, with Father about to leave us alone in San Francisco, I made an important decision. I would not give up my new life for my brother. Chapter 12. 3 weeks after we arrived in San Francisco, it was in September, I rode Father along with his shovel, pickaxe, gold sifting pans, and other equipment across the shallow, smelly waters of Yerba Buena Cove. Jacob was with us. We were taking Father to the Senator, a black and white side-wheeler steamship. She was anchored some 200 yards from San Francisco's landing beach, ready for a 10-hour trip to Sacramento and the gold diggings. We reached the boat and climbed aboard. Once there, Father chucked a brooding Jacob under the chin to get him to look up. "Keep watching for Mother," he said. "You know how unpredictable ships are coming from back east. But you understand I can't wait for her." He kept saying this as if he needed to justify his leaving us alone. "I need to get to the diggings before the gold gives out." "Mother may well arrive tomorrow," Father continued. "When she gets here, stay with our tent so I can find you. Keep checking the post office. I have to assume she'll write to say on which ship she'll come. Now I have asked Senor Rosales to keep a watch on you. Pay heed to him." It wasn't as if Father had become friends with the Senor, but the young men who were in tents to either side of us changed frequently, moving in and moving out, quickly replaced by new miners. But aside from the fact that Senor Rosales was the only man who stayed, I found him to be wise, kind, and generous. "I'll return no later than December 1st, continued Father. "By that time, I'll be rich, and I promise you, I'll build a bigger and better home than our Providence house." All I said to Father was, "Yes, sir." I lacked the courage to tell what I had learned. Only a few miners made fortunes. Truth be known, I had more gold in my pocket from working in the city than most. What's more, I was weary of Father's empty assurances and lecturing. She'd kind of heard it all before. Father, who continued to smile through his new beard, which made him look like a short, pudgy bear, turned again to Jacob and said, "Try not to worry." To me, he added, "Try and act a little ladylike. Think of what Aunt Lavinia would say." I no longer did. Father gripped our shoulders and gave us a final squeeze. "I'm planning," he said, "on all of us having a plum of a Christmas right here in San Francisco." "Yes, sir," I said. "Continue to take whatever suitable jobs you can," he said to me, "and be careful with the money I've left you for as long as possible. You should have enough until I get back. Victoria, Make sure to keep the money in that belt I got you. Is that clear? He leaned forward and in a half whisper added, I've put a knife in the belt, in case. A knife? The notion frightened me. But then I reasoned that it was what so many San Francisco men had. It was part of the outfit. It might as well be part of mine. And here, Father said to Jacob, is a good luck pelican feather for you. I knew my brother well enough to guess his thoughts. A knife for Tori, a pelican feather for me. He had become a sullen boy. Next moment, the ship blew a whistle blast that snatched me from my thoughts. Time for you to get off, said Father, and he shook hands with Jacob and gave me a hug, his new beard scratchy, which I did not like. As we climbed down the ship's rope ladder, Father leaned over the rail and watched as we got into our borrowed rowboat. It was part of the freedom of San Francisco that rowboats and other small boats were left at the Cove Beach, and that people could borrow them so long as they brought them back. I took up the oars. Jacob got into the stern seat. Father, standing among the crowd of gold miners who had paid $15 for passage, waved goodbye. There were so many men on the ship that it listed starboard. Jacob refused to look back, but only gripped the gunwale of our rowboat, muttering crossly to himself. I began to row us back to the Cove Beach. There it was. Jacob and I were in San Francisco, alone. How did I feel? Exhilarated. To my knowledge, there was no book that I had read about a girl alone in a wild and wicked city. I was a heroine like no other. Then I considered Jacob sitting in the stern, looking small and abandoned. He was an impediment. He had become, I realized, a new anchor. Wow. That's a really big change in how Tori's been looking at Jacob. Do you think that's just a short-term thing? Do you think that's going to last a while? Why do you think Tori's feeling like that? How do you think their father's feeling? I mean, he's just left his two children, 10 and 14, alone in what seems like a wild city with no servants, no real help, no real adult supervision. I don't know, guys. I'm curious to see where this goes. Next time we're going to pick up with chapter 13. One last look at the books. Oh, I hope you guys are excited as I am to see these. Talk to you soon. Bye.